Song of the Grey Wolf. It is known that in the beginning the original man walked the face of the earth with his brother the wolf, naming all the animals. When it was done, they parted company, and each went his own way. This story is not about that, but of a later time. In those days, if you reached the age of 20, you were considered to be middle-aged. People grew old more quickly because of the hard life they had to lead. Hunting was dangerous work, and many were killed in accidents. Some even died from animal attacks if they had not performed a proper ceremony to honor the animal spirits before the hunt. It was especially dangerous if the people forgot to thank the animal spirits that had died in order to feed the people. This was a very serious thing that could not go unpunished, for the safety of the whole camp was at stake. That was why it was so surprising that one man who had already reached middle age was guilty of not performing the thanking ceremony. Oh, he would make a big show in the ceremony before the hunt to ensure plenty of food. Afterward, though, with his belly full of fresh meat, he couldn't be bothered. He was too tired and sleepy. He would do it another time. But that other time never seemed to come. The village elders were very concerned about this. It could not be allowed, but no matter how they talked and argued with the man, it did no good. So the elders had no choice but to banish him from the camp. In order to ensure that the man did not return, the shaman hid the man's voice so he could not perform any of the ceremonies. It was a cruel thing to do, but the safety of the camp must be defended. They told him that the only way he would be allowed to return was to find his voice and bring it to them in a special way. The man wandered for days in the freezing cold with little food and was getting very hungry. He stumbled onto a cluster of giant stones near the river and thought to get out of the wind behind them. To his surprise, he found a cave entrance behind the stones and went in to inspect it. Down, down, down he went until he came to a flat space in the cave. And there was light by which to see. He looked up to see a shaft upward to the ground above. It was warm down here, too. The cave had been empty for some time, so the man felt safe to stay in it. Now, if only he could hunt for some meat, he might survive. But he had no voice, so he could not honor the animal spirits. Once the snows came, he would not be able to find any nuts or berries. It would not be too long before he would starve unless he could find his voice again. The man sat in his warm cave and tried to make sounds, but none came out. Try as he might, nothing happened. There were only tiny squeaks and the sound of his breath passing his lips. He felt very bad about having been too lazy to thank the animal spirits for having fed him, but now he could not tell them. He could tell no one because his voice had been hidden. All the words of all the ceremonies he had not performed were locked inside the man's heart and pressed on him to get out. But it was no use. No sound came. Finally, he became so depressed that he left his warm cave and went outside into the night. It happened that just then the first snow came in the form of a raging blizzard. The man was too upset to notice. He stood not far from the shaft coming from the cave where some heat was rising from it and stared into the blinding snowstorm. There was a very large dark form nearby. It sounded like a lot of growling and snorting going on around it. He started toward it to see what it was. Just as he did so, the form hurled itself in his direction in a stampede. It was a small herd of buffalo being hunted by wolves. The man had no time to get out of the way. Instinctively he crouched down, covering his head with his arms as the herd trampled over him, knocking him this way and that. In a moment they were gone, and the man lay on the ground trying to determine where he had been hurt. That he had survived the stampede at all was a miracle in itself. Other than a very sore hand, he seemed to be all right. As he picked himself up off the ground, he saw another figure lying close by. On inspection, the man found it to be a wolf that had been slashed by a sharp hoof. There was a lot of blood around his body coming from a long gash in his side, but he was still breathing. The man thought it would not be for long. Without thinking, he laid his great coat on the ground and wrestled the wolf onto it. As far as he could drag him was to the warm shaft over the cave. His hand was badly broken and hurt too much to go any further. Finally, he just covered the giant animal with the coat and went back down into the cave to nurse his injured hand. By the next afternoon the storm had ended, and the man returned to see what had happened to the great wolf. He could not believe his eyes. On the robe where he had expected to see the dead animal, there was none. Instead, the hind quarter of a young buffalo calf was left in his place. He had never heard of such a thing before, but he was grateful, taking the fresh meat down to the cave where he made short work of it to satisfy his great hunger. This time he did not forget about performing the thanking ceremony. But he had no voice. How could the animal spirits hear his gratitude if he had no voice? Try as he might, no sound would pass his lips. The praises he wanted to sing were stuck inside his heart, and without a voice they could not be carried to the animal spirits. No one would know how he felt. It was no use. He would never be able to thank the giant wolf for sharing his food, or the buffalo herd for giving up their young calves so that others may eat. How foolish he had been in the past! Now he would never be able to recognize their sacrifices on his behalf. He would never be able to return to his camp. Sad and dejected, the man went back out into the cold. It was a very clear, quiet night. The moon hung low over the horizon, and many stars twinkled in the sky. The man sat down in the wind-driven snow and looked around in wonder at all the beautiful things there were to be thankful for. Yet he could do nothing about it. His chest swelled up with all the gratitude trapped inside. A tear fell from his eye in sorrow. In the distance, a lone wolf sang his song to the moon, and the sound carried over the cold, crackling air. After a few minutes, another sang in reply. Then the first one raised his voice again. The man was so overcome with the beauty of the sound that he filled his lungs and tried to answer the wolves. Of course, nothing more than a few squeaks and hot breath escaped his lips. Just when he was feeling helpless, the two wolves in the distance howled again in unison. Had they heard his silent song? It could not be. Suddenly there was another long, loud howl coming from right beside him. Shocked, the man whirled his head around to see a huge gray wolf standing at his side, head raised, and singing a deep howl with all his might. They stared at each other in the cold, crisp air as the big animal lay down in the snow. The man could see the scar in his side, dried blood still clinging to the fur. They had met before. Neither felt any fear of the other as the man lay down in the snow on his own belly beside his brother the wolf. They just looked into each other's eyes. An answer came from the distance. Now there were at least 4 of them. The big gray animal raised its head to sing again, and the man did the same. At first, no sound came from the man, but as he strained his lungs with all his might, a faint sound began to form. It came quietly and low at first, but as he kept straining, it grew stronger until he and the wolf were singing as one. It was sheer joy to hear the sound of his own voice and to feel the vibrations it made. One by one his praises of gratitude flew out from his mouth, and were carried away to all the animal spirits on the wings of his voice. He and his brother the wolf sang and sang into the night, until all the songs had been sung, and the man collapsed from exhaustion. The man rose and returned to his cave, where he ate some of the meat that was left. He was careful not to eat it all, but left some at the place where he had first seen the dying wolf. Then he wrapped his heavy coat around himself and began the long journey home to his camp. Just outside the camp, where he could hear the hunters in their preparation ceremony, the man lay down on his belly in the snow and began to sing the song of the gray wolf with all his might. He did this at different places around the camp until he had made a full circle. Then he waited until morning light before entering the camp. The elders were shocked to see him, especially when he greeted them in his full voice. They had thought he would never have found it again. In truth, they never expected to see him again. By now, they thought he would have died of starvation. But he had found his voice, and they must allow him to return. "We have just prepared for a hunt, but we are worried about going. We heard wolves nearby last night." "Only one," said the man, ignoring the puzzled look on their faces. "That means it will be a successful hunt, for I have prepared for it too." The hunt was more successful than they could have imagined. The elders suspected it had something to do with the man they had banished. They offered him the first taste of meat, but he refused. "First, I must thank the spirits of our brothers who feed us so well," he said. He left them and returned to his place just outside the camp, where he lay down on his belly and began to sing the song of the wolf as he had learned it. When he had circled the camp with his song, he returned and took his place among the people. No one ever spoke of this, but the people knew that the man had been given the spirit of the gray wolf, because in times to come, when they heard the song of the wolf nearby, they knew they would have a successful hunt. When they made the man their chief, they became the first wolf clan among all the people in the land. These were the keepers of the law of the earth.